Okay, hey guys, welcome to lecture 4, pages 9 through 11. All right, 9 through 11, and today we continue the presidency. All right, so let's look at this. So again, we're going right back into this idea of presidential power growing again. All right, you're looking at page 9 again, and you want to kind of re-emphasize this idea that, again, the framers thought that Congress would tend to be the dominant power in the United States government. However, we've seen the presidency, especially the modern presidency, emerge as something that truly can challenge Congress's power, right? And so, again, earlier presidents tended to have a limited view, whereas the more modern presidents, more recent presidents have definitely used the presidency to expand their initiative, to expand their power, and challenge Congress, all right? And again, so we looked at those non-constitutional reasons, right? Unity of office, personality. Now, this one thing on C, growing complexity of society. It says, with a highly industrial, technological society, people have demanded that the federal government play a larger role in areas of concern. Pollution, labor, labor issues, air safety, travel. And so the executive branch has thus grown to meet these demands. What that means by the executive branch has grown, it doesn't mean there's more presidents, right? But it means the bureaucracy has grown. It means there's been more and more executive agencies to deal with the problems that society wants done. Because remember, Congress writes the laws to deal with these issues, but we need somebody to carry it out. So if the American public demands that these issues are met, Congress writes legislation for it, and somebody needs to implement it. And the people that are implementing it are the bureaucracy under the control of the executive. All right? Now again, I can't stress this enough on D, number 2 in page 9. This idea that Congress writes broadly worded legislation and lets the executive branch fill in the holes. Right? It gives them, you're going to see when we study the next unit, that they write something called rules and regulations. And these rules and regulations are what tell us exactly how to carry out law. And there's a ton of power within that if you get to decide how a law is implemented, okay? Congress, and again, crisis, right? Economic and foreign crisis, president's power tend to grow. And then also this idea of a mandate from the people, all right? Now remember, if a president comes to power after an election and they can claim a mandate from the people, that means they've generally won an election with a large vote. And if they win from a large vote, they can go put pressure on Congress and say, look, the majority of the American public voted for me, and therefore they want the ideas I campaigned on, so let's get those things done. You can push Congress to get those things done. All right, again, the electronic throne is gigantic. All right, and again, this idea of following World War II, that there's just kind of this, the world is so fast, the pace is so fast, the challenges are so complex and quick and require speed that we kind of have assumed that there's this kind of consistent economic or foreign crisis going on, and therefore the president has a lot of power to act on that quickly. All right, now, these 3 rules of thumb, move it or lose it. You guys know this. Presidents need to try to get things done early in their presidency because we know that their popularity goes down. And if their popularity goes down, they become less powerful, right? The other idea is avoid the details. Focus on big ideas. You know, we've seen Barack Obama focus on the Affordable Care Act. We've seen Barack Obama, focus on a big issue rather than a whole bunch of issues because it's easier to get something big done, right? And then finally, the other thing is, one more rule of thumb, is trust your White House staff because they're loyal to you rather than trusting your cabinet secretaries who have a whole, it's not that they're untrustworthy, it's just remember that cabinet secretaries, based on that one handout I gave you, have multiple loyalties, right? They have Congress, they have the bureaucratic agency itself and all the people that work within it, they have the interest groups that put pressure on them, and the president. So it's hard to, you can't always trust a cabinet secretary, right? Okay, now, the power of the president. It's not as clearly defined as it is for Congress in the Constitution, right? And therefore, if it's vague and it's not spelled out clearly, you can enhance those powers. Now, the converse of that is, if it's not that clear, then maybe Congress or the Supreme Court can say you don't have that power. They can limit your power. But again, a personality or a crisis can read the Constitution to enhance those powers, all right? Emergency presidents tend to have more power. We know this, right? We're getting redundant. That's good. It's getting easier, all right? But in normal times, they have the normal checks and balances, right? They have divided government, they have Congress, they have the courts, they have the whole bit, because in domestic issues, in normal times, presidents tend to get challenged. All right, now let's look at this. It says checks that weaken the president. And it says traditional checks, right? This idea of Congress, the courts, elections check the president, right? All the checks that Congress has, all the checks that the courts have on the presidency, But there's some other things that tend to check them. Now look at this. Congressional leaders. So these are our Speaker of the House. This is our Majority Leader. These are our whips. These are our committee chairs, right? I mean, they have the ability to challenge the presidency because they lead in Congress. They get the media. They have the power to use the legislative power, investigative power, oversight power, right? To check the president, all right? And, you know, John Boehner, you know, every time Barack Obama speaks, you know, John Boehner and Harry Reid speak because they're the leaders of their respective parties and respective chambers. All right, now cabinet members. Think about this as a check. They have different agendas. Their agency has a goal, right? They want to be bigger, stronger. You know, they don't want their agency to be smaller. You know, the agency's agendas as well may conflict with the president's agenda, right? So that can check. They can challenge the president. They have different loyalties. Congress, interest groups, the constituents, meaning the people that benefit or have to interact with that cabinet level agency, that bureaucratic agency, you know, to put pressure on cabinet leaders, cabinet members, right? Congress, interest groups, the constituents, right? All of these people put pressure on a cabinet member that may give them, you know, ideas or may force them to act in ways that are contrary to the president. Now again, if they act too contrary, remember that a president can hire and fire the top 10% whenever they desire. Okay? Now, if you look at the number 3 on page 10, the bureaucrats, right? Remember that generally we think of bureaucrats as the 90% of the bureaucracy that are civil servants. So what you have is you have, you know, roughly 2.5 million people that regardless of who's the president, they have their jobs. So, you know, 90% of the bureaucracy was the same when George Bush had it as when Barack Obama had it. Those people have a culture. Those people have a way of doing things. Those people are experts in their field. You know, they've been there a long time. And so when a new president comes into town, a new sheriff comes into town and says, this is how we're going to do it, they can resist. And one of the things you're going to learn in the next unit is these bureaucrats can't be fired for political reasons. Right? So just because, you know, you don't like that president's ideology, they can't fire you for ideology. Now they can fire you for doing a bad job and things like that, which we'll get to. But those people are resistant sometimes to presidencies, right? The president. All right, political parties. Now just think about this. A president is the head of a Democratic Party or Republican Party. But remember the wide range of ideologies exist within each of those parties. So a president's going to have a hard time pleasing all of his party or all of his party. And again, remember that presidents tend to come from the middle because they're national interests that they care about. And so they can anger the far parts of their party, which can cause issues, right? They could get challenged legislatively. They could get challenged by their party, all right? Now, the other thing are interest groups. You know that interest groups will lobby Congress to get things done. Interest groups will lobby the masses through the media. Interest groups will lobby the presidency, right? Interest groups will use all the powers and resources that they have to challenge a president's agenda if they don't like it, all right? You know, so you've got to remember that they're going to put pressure. These interest groups will put pressure on a presidency. The media is huge, right? Everything a president does is with the idea that how will this look in the media, or how will the media interact, you know, interpret it? How will they portray it? All right, how's it going to make me look? And not superficially, just you have to deal with the media. You have to answer to the media as its watchdog, right? All right, now a couple other things. Don't worry about the independent counsel. That law has actually expired. All right. But senators, again, this is a congressional thing. They can use holds on your nominations. They can use filibusters on your nominations, which again is generally a non-traditional role. These are rules that aren't in the Constitution. Divided government, right? Most presidents tend to have some kind of divided government. You know, we saw Barack Obama come to power, you know, in 2008, where he had Democratic Congresses, and think about those rules of move it or lose it, get it done now, because he had Democratic House, Democratic Senate. He could claim somewhat of a mandate from the people and get things done, right? Divided government is a huge obstacle to a president's political agenda or legislative agenda, all right? And then this idea of a more multilateral world versus a unilateral world. There are more centers of power around the world maybe than following World War II. You know, right around World War II, there was the United States and there was the Soviet Union. And generally there was a team of states that were under Soviet control and a team of states that were aligned with the United States. And so when the United States spoke, our allies kind of did what we told them to do or what we asked them to do. And nowadays, we have China, we have Russia, we have the European Union, you have Latin America. There's more power around the world that can challenge the United States. And this just means politically. It doesn't mean necessarily militarily, although it can also mean militarily. All right. Let's skip this idea of the 6-year term, 2 or 3 presidencies. We've already looked at those. Okay, let's go to page 11 for me, all right? Now, again, the idea, it starts to repeat itself, which, again, is a good thing, all right? The founders intended Congress to be the dominant branch, right? Okay. However, we've seen the presidency grow in the 20th century. Now, what we're going to look at is the power of the president has grown recently, right? From, say, World War II on, to the point where we're going to look in a couple days that Congress feels that there's this thing called the imperial presidency, right, which is a reference to an emperor, that the presidents have become too powerful and Congress needs to reassert its power when challenging the presidency. And we'll get to that. But look at these sources of conflict, right? The Constitution invites struggle. And it has, legislative and executive powers separated, right? It divided them constitutionally, has checks and balances within it. The Constitution invites our legislative branch and our executive branch to struggle. And the idea is that that struggle, that competition for power, will ideally keep power out of the hands of one person who can act tyrannically, all right? There's supposed to be conflict. I mean, anytime, you see Congress just saying, yes, Mr. President, we'll do whatever you want, that's probably a scary thing because, we want to have vigorous and strong debates about what presidents are doing. Trust but verify, as Ronald Reagan said. Let's we may believe in a president's agenda, but we want Congress to challenge them. Now, the other thing is, look at this conflict. Think about who a member of Congress represents. A senator represents an entire state, right? A member of the House represents a small congressional district. And remember that idea that all politics is local. So, this is a quiz question too. You want to make sure you get that Congress tends to represent state and local interests, whereas the president tends to represent the national interest, right? Because they're elected by the whole, or at least over 50%, or a majority of electoral votes, right? So, they have different constituencies, Congress and the president. And therefore, they're going to conflict. Because if you look at the example in your notes is about Yucca Mountain, President Bush thought nationally it would be a good thing to have a place to store the nation's nuclear waste for safety reasons, etc. Whereas our congressional delegation in Nevada, thought of the safety hazards, the problems with it. We didn't want the nation's nuclear waste in our country. And therefore, they challenged it. And at this point, Yucca Mountain is dead. Yucca Mountain got built, but Yucca Mountain is not housing the nation's nuclear waste at this moment. All right? Now, again, this idea of different times of elections. So again, remember, every 2 years there's midterm elections, what we generally tend to see, and this is a trend, right? The party of the president tends to lose power in Congress at a midterm election, which is generally seen as a referendum or a vote on what the president promised he would do, and has he done that? And they reward or punish the president, but they do it through Congress in those midterm elections, right? And so generally, the different types of elections, every 4 years versus every 2 years in Congress, means we have different parties controlling and leading to divided government, all right, which is going to challenge a president. All right, now party. Again, the idea is this. Is there parties? The Republicans are a wide range of Republicans. The Democrats are a wide range of Democrats. And therefore, the president has to deal with all of those ranges of political ideology and trying to deal with them. All right, so the president doesn't own the Democrats right now, just like George Bush didn't own the Republicans. They're going to challenge even their own president, although more than likely parties are going to back their president, right, in Congress? Okay, now, here's the thing, this conflict, the two presidencies theses by Aaron Vidalski, and you want to know this, all right? Congress tends to cooperate with the president on foreign policy, policy abroad, and national security issues, especially in times of crises, right? Because we expect a president to be able to act quickly in these crises. And it's also, we send a president abroad to represent this country, right? We can't send 535 people abroad, right? And again, remember the treaties that come back, have to be confirmed by the Senate. If a president goes too far out of what Congress likes, they will challenge them back home. All right, but they tend to be more cooperative on those because they know it's kind of like we're family, and maybe at home we can fight it out, right? Or we can disagree and be more vigorous debate. But when you go out there, you're going to agree a little bit more and not rip on each other in public. All right? The joke, or not the joke, but the old adage is that partisanship stops at the shore's edge. Meaning when we go abroad, right, presidents tend to have the backing of our country. Now that doesn't mean they won't challenge a president, but that's generally the trend. And then on domestic issues and economic issues, Congress tends to be less cooperative, because on domestic and economic issues, they're really looking after their state and local interests and challenging the president. All right? Now, so that's the kind of struggle between the president and Congress. And if you look at, sources of presidential influence upon Congress, the media, the electronic throne, right? Claiming a mandate from the people, meaning I got a huge electoral victory. That means the people want what I ran on. Let's go. Let's get it done, right? Or they can go to the electronic throne and, pressure you. All right? Again, now this idea of patronage. Remember, patronage is this idea of giving jobs, grants, favors to people as a political reward. Now, how does that act as an influence on Congress? Well, the president can use, remember, we said that roughly 300,000 jobs within the government are patronage positions. So what you can do with these patronage positions as the president is you can use them as kind of not gifts, and I don't want you to think of it as bribery or quid pro quo, but maybe the idea that you can use these patronage positions, and when you're negotiating with Congress, be like, look, I have these positions. Do you happen to have people that you would like to fill them? Fill these positions. And if a member of Congress does, they can give those to their constituents or interest groups or people that they're dealing with, and they may then in return owe you a favor and help you out. All right? It cultivates a relationship with members of Congress. All right? By giving these jobs, grants, favors to Congress to get them something they need so you can get something you need. All right? All right. Now, the chief of party role, convincing members to act in party unity, right? The president can say, look, you may disagree with me a little bit, but you disagree with your party more. Let's work together to get something done, all right? Lobbying members of Congress, all right? And again, a president can go after people in the electronic throne. A president can use patronage to bring in people. The presidency used to have this boat, right? This boat that could go up and down the Delaware like sailing, and presidents would use that and bring members of Congress to have discussions, right? You can lobby a member of Congress, is there anything I can do for your district if I can get your vote on this issue? Like think about the log rolling we saw in Congress. The president can use the powers of the president to help members of Congress out, whether it be a bureaucratic agency taking care of issues that a member of Congress's constituents need help with, right? Or patronage positions, or, can I come to your hometown and campaign for you to help you raise money to get reelected? Like the presidency can be used to ask members of Congress to help the president out. All right? And again, the veto. The veto is huge, right? 93% of vetoes stand. 93% of vetoes are not overridden. So when a president threatens a veto, that has a tremendous impact on the members of Congress, right? All right, and then finally, an emergency. National emergency gives them tons of power, right? Moments of crisis give them tons of power. All right? All right. So that's it. That's quick, right? I'll see you guys tomorrow.